Hey guys, it's Joe from GadgetryTech.com, and today we are reviewing the Zyxel PLA6456 Powerline kit. This one uses G.hn technology, which is kind of a new standard, a new protocol over the older ones, which used AV or AV2. The idea of G.hn technology is it gives you more bandwidth or more speed on the same Powerline kit. So if you have an AV2 box or an AV unit, and then you compare it to this, theoretically the G.hn should perform better. We're going to test that after, but I wanted to explain that technology. So G.hn is cool because it also works over phone line and coaxial, so you can use the same networking standards on all three. The focus on this is Powerline, so we'll stay there. So Powerlines operate at 50 to 60 hertz depending on where you are in the world, so you have kind of limited bandwidth on operating frequency that it works. The reason why they did this is by creating more overlap in the signal. In that 60 hertz range. This can go anywhere from 2 to 80 hertz depending on what signal it's sending out. That just gives you more to work with. It gives you more data, more speed. With that being said, they say that this works up to 8K content. AV and AV2 can technically support 8K content, which requires about 100 megabits per second. It's not a gig plus. However, I've used several Powerline kits in the past, and the thing I've noticed is the theoretical max is great. You want a high max speed, but you're never going to get that theoretical max. There's too many imperfections in power lines. It's going through breakers, the outlets, the wiring in your home or wherever it is, etc. So because of that, having something as high as this with this new standard should give you a more stable connection, and with the much higher baseline speed, even with degradation, it should support 8K no problem. So I'm looking forward to testing that out. Now that we've explained that, I want to show you a couple other things. So they say that this is good for up to 500 meter connections, which if you know cable length, that's a lot longer than most or all Ethernet cords that I've ever seen. That's longer than what most wireless signals can support, etc. So the range should be good. Again, it's all theoretical. It depends on your environment. We'll spend more time unboxing the rest. But to show you these units, so it supports up to 500 meter connections. It does encrypt your signal. It's AES 128-bit. Capable, and there's a little button to encrypt and connect on the side here. So these things, I'm going to point this out now, they're a little bigger and heavier than some other Powerline kits. They're also well ventilated. So with that extreme performance, obviously these require a little bit more juice, a little bit more capability, so it has a bigger case. I've used the Nanos before from TP-Link, for example, and they're much smaller, but the performance wasn't that great. So they didn't last too long compared to my other stuff I've used. So I'm looking forward to seeing how fast these things go, but a big kick-ass feature that I love is that it has an AC outlet on the front of each device. Powerline kits do not like to be plugged into surge protectors, especially ones that do any kind of filtering, because that basically kills how they're supposed to work. You want to plug these in directly into the wall. So I love that they're doing this, because if you have to plug it into a wall that has a surge protector on it, plug this in first, then plug the surge protector into the outside. The American version of the 120 volts supports up to 15 amps, and then in Europe it supports up to 16 amps just because of the way the voltage calculations work out. But 15 amps means that you can fully utilize the breaker's capability for your room. So most houses use 15 amp breakers. This isn't going to keep you from using anything that you would have normally used, allowing you to get the speed, the data, and not lose power connection. So that's awesome. You naturally get two of these. They are identical in every way, which means you can put them on either side. What I mean by that is if you are connecting this to a router, you plug this into the wall next to the router, then use the Ethernet cable to connect it to a router's output, one of the switch ports on the back. Then you put this wherever you need a signal. You would put this next to another computer, a networking switch if you need multiple connections on the other side, or even an access point if you need to give yourself a boost of wireless signal on the other side. You can use these as a bridge for an access point, which is awesome. Going into the connections, I talked about connecting it to a router or a switch or a computer. This is the only thing I'm not too crazy about with this product, is the Ethernet cables are kind of short. They are 3 feet long. They're both yellow, of course. The color is just, whatever, but 3 feet long isn't really long enough for most setups. If this is mounting on a traditional spot on your wall and your router is on a table, that becomes incredibly tight right off the bat. So I wish it was 4 or 5 feet. I think that would have been a little bit more usable, but I just want to point that out because this is an unbiased review, And if you are buying this for a big project on a weekend and you want it to work, make sure you have long enough Ethernet cables that fit where you go. A lot of companies do 3-footers, some do 6 or 5, but these are 3. You get a couple quick start guides, and the only reason why there's 2 is because there's a lot more languages on this one, and then you get one with other languages. So we're going to spend some time testing this and see if the speeds live up to the expectation and the advertisement. We'll test stability, performance, over a long period of time to make sure it's not a fluke, and then when we report back. So stay tuned, we're going to dive in. Okay, even though the Zyxel Powerline kit is completely plug and play, I want to point out that there is a web interface. So if you have to make some changes to it, you basically need to know what the Powerline kit network IP address is. You can do that by usually logging into your router and looking at the device list and see what's there. So we're going to not focus on that so much. If you have questions, you can shoot me a comment and I can help explain it. But anyway, when you log in, the G.hn tab or link, if you will, on the left shows you this page here. This is where you can set the domain, which is basically the group that all of the devices will fall under. Force node type. This is kind of nice because if you're having some issues with performance or the device is confused on which node it is, domain master is basically the device that's connected to your router. So if you have 5 Powerline adapters or 6 Powerline adapters, and you want to make sure that the one connected to your router knows it's the domain master and it's not going to change, you can assign that here. Otherwise, as you can tell with automatic, it still figures it out pretty well. It just monitors traffic and what it's receiving on the opposite end to determine that. G.hn profile, the default is the PLC 100 MHz MIMO boost. You can switch to the 1000 MHz boost. Use the MIMO unless you're having some odd issues, because the multi-input, multi-output should give you better bandwidth, especially when you have multiple devices using this network at the same time. Encryption is enabled. That's that little button I pointed out on the side. If you need to pair and encrypt the connection, you can change the pairing password by logging into each device here to make sure you have your own unique password if you're paranoid about traffic. Available connections. We only have a single Ethernet Powerline kit paired to this. So we're only going to see one extra device here. This is basically on the receiving end, or the opposite side of the office where we're doing our speed test. I wanted to show you this because right now it says the physical transfer rate that it's negotiated and receive rate is 791 megabits per second and 666. That's a theoretical peak. Real world testing would not typically give you that. On this particular speed test, I got 306 versus the 666 for my download speed. And then on the opposite end, this is sending at 791. And I got 328 on the opposite end. So as far as my speeds go, they don't quite line up, but this still at least gives you a ballpark if you're getting a usable enough negotiated speed. Going to the IP address, you can set a static IP. This is, again, I don't want to get too complicated here. DHCP is enabled by default, again, because these are plug and play. If you need to assign a manual or static IP that does not change, you can do that here. However, only mess with that if you know what you're doing and you understand how network topology and configuration works. If I click on Ethernet, this is showing that we're running at full gig or 1 gig full duplex. The link state is up right now, and you can actually enable power saving mode. The default is to leave it on Ethernet link, which means if there's no cable connected to the Powerline adapter, it'll go in power save mode after 300 seconds. If you want to set it to Ethernet activity, that means if there's 300 seconds of no network traffic, it'll go into power save mode. Don't recommend doing that unless you're really stingy with power. That will cause some delays in network traffic in case you need to hit a device on that's on a node that's asleep. So I would leave it on Ethernet active or link or disabled. The default is activity, so we're going to leave that there. If I click on device, this is basically hardware-based stuff. So we're going to see the serial number, MAC address, the hardware version, the firmware, which as of June 8th, this is the firmware that we're running right now. This is 2020. You can set a different login password if you don't want the default, and you can choose a new upgrade file in case you downloaded new firmware because there's new features. I recommend checking it when you first get the product because sometimes new features comes out or performance improvements. So it's good to have the latest file. The other thing I wanted to point out that's important is multicast. This is a critical feature for just the plug and play I talked about earlier. If you have something like an Apple AirPlay device or a Google Chromecast and you want to share content or mirror things from a smartphone or something like that, having that turned on is required. It is enabled by default. The only reason why you would want to shut this off is if you're trying to maximize performance, because IGMP snooping does cause a little bit of overhead, which can reduce performance. However, when I tested it on and off, I didn't really notice anything. Nothing that a benchmark wouldn't really point out. Real world testing, you shouldn't see a difference here. The last feature I want to point out, and before I move on, the multicast traffic, you don't need to worry about IGMP broadcast report. Most people that would have to turn this on already know if they need to turn this on or not, so we're not going to explain it. It basically helps set priority on how IGMP reporting works in your network, so we're going to leave that off because that is not necessary. Just leave it alone. Log file. This is really cool because Zyxel makes a lot of prosumer and professional / enterprise products. It's not just the consumer stuff. So I love that they have this, because if you happen to use this Powerline kit in an enterprise environment or prosumer environment where you have more settings requirements, you can enable logging. So if you have an FTP server inside your network, it can log into the FTP server. Once you set your username, password, and you point out a path, it follows the default FTP credentials. It's not SFTP, so it is in plain text, and then you can choose how frequently it updates. It's not the most robust configuration option, but the fact that you can get log data out of a Powerline kit is awesome, so I wanted to call that out. That covers the web interface. Now we're actually going to show you and discuss performance. All right, so we've hammered this thing pretty hard over the last week as far as speed tests go. We've done very large file transfers over the network to see if it would error out. We've done testing on multiple outlets in the same room or the same circuit, different circuits, etc., just to kind of see how the outlets and types of circuitry can affect performance. So long story short, the performance has been rock solid. I didn't have any file transfers error out, and I transferred about 400 gigabytes through this kit. Couple waves of it, so it's been rock solid there as far as stability goes. I never quite hit over a gig per second. I got surprisingly fast results inside the office, even with all this electronics in here. I have a lot of lighting, obviously computer equipment, etc., and I was still able to get over 500 megabits per second through the Powerline on certain outlets. So we're going to get into how that affects performance in a minute, but one thing I want to mention, this does support up to 14 nodes, so if you have one plugged into your router or switch, you can have up to 13 of these throughout your home, office environment, wherever they may be, and all share that bandwidth. It's good to have because you don't want to completely saturate your Wi-Fi. If you rely too much on Wi-Fi because it's a shared connection, performance will degrade very quickly. If you're in an apartment or an area next to a lot of wireless networks, having something like this that provides a good backbone is a great option to consider if you can't run Ethernet. So, with that being said, it's time to talk about speed tests. So we're going to start with speed tests in 3 different locations of the home. Just to give you an idea on how this works. So we use the Zyxel Powerline kit, obviously, and we use 2 different routers, all using the same network adapter just for consistency. So the first router is basically your most elaborate, one of your most expensive single point routers, the Asus ROG GT AX1100. There are a ton of antennas on this thing. It looks like something from a different planet. However, the performance is phenomenal. And then we, of course, tested an ISP supplied dual band router, which performed pretty well considering. I was actually surprised how well it kept up with the Asus ROG in certain areas. So first things first, we're going to start with the same room. So in the office, I tested multiple outlets, so I picked the middle one. I didn't pick the fastest or the worst, and we'll get into that in a minute on why. However, inside the office, I was able to get 306 megabits per second down and 329 megabits per second up through the Powerline kit. When I tested the exact same speed inside the office, I got 287 down on the Asus router, 301 up, and on the cheap router, I got 290 down and 240 up. These are averages over 3 tests. You don't see any decimals here because I didn't want to clutter up the graph. However, there were, of course, some remaining numbers that followed the decimal place just over a span of averaging out 3 tests. Going into the kitchen, this is not on a GFI circuit. This is on an outlet that was adjacent to the kitchen, so I could eliminate GFI as any kind of weird performance issues. It did work. It was slightly slower, but we wanted to maintain consistency with the Wi-Fi. So in the kitchen, we got the Zyxel Powerline kit 128 down, 99 up. The Asus ROG is starting to show why it costs as much as it does. That area typically has more interference, and that's still got 281 down, 177 up. And then the cheapo router, from the ISP got 132 down 40 up. So this is interesting because just going about 60 feet away on what a traditional router would be, the Powerline kit matched or exceeded it. On upload speed, it absolutely crushed it. It was a lot more stable. So if you're doing a lot of heavier file transfers, literally just going 50 feet away on a typical router, you're already getting better performance out of the Powerline kit. Going all the way to the master bedroom, this is the farthest physical point from the router, both on Wi-Fi and in this case the Powerline kit. I plugged it all in the same spot so it wouldn't manipulate the numbers. Powerline kit 86 down 42 up. The Asus ROG got 109 down 121 up, and the ISP router surprisingly kept up and got 89 down and 122 up. So this was the only case where I found the Zyxel Powerline kit to start to struggle. And again, I want to point this out because placing it in different spots on the same circuit, or breaker, if you will. Everyone has 15 amp breakers. Each breaker will have several outlets connected to it. You can get very different performance depending on which outlet you picked. This at least confirms, however, that the Zyxel Powerline kit can hold its own and keep up with several other routers and do its job admirably because it doesn't saturate your Wi-Fi and it's not impacted by other wireless issues. So when we move on to testing for speed inside the same office, if you will, we on the neighboring outlets. So basically we had a Powerline kit going into my server closet. That's where the master is, that's connected to the router and switch. On the opposite side of the same wall, on an adjacent outlet, I plugged the other Powerline kit in and we did a speed test. I got 482 down and 537 up. Honestly, I probably would have exceeded 537 up. I only get about 540 going straight hardwire. These are actual real-world internet speed tests that I ran multiple times. It was not, a file transfer inside the network. I just wanted to see what it could do on the web because we never saturated the connection anyway. This is one of the few cases where doing a file transfer from one side of the wall to the other would have exceeded this. However, the main point of this is to show you how much faster, how much an outlet choice can impact speed. So if we go into an outlet that has a USB transformer built in, I have an outlet in every room of the house that has 2 USB ports. It's just for convenience. The performance is absolutely terrible on a Powerline kit using an outlet that has a USB port built into it. So literally 5 feet away from where I got the 482 537, I got 170 554. Absolutely atrocious performance compared to being that. And that's not a problem with the Zyxel Powerline kit. That's just the nature of an outlet that has a transformer on it. There's a lot of noise and that kills your performance capability through a Powerline kit. So using the farthest outlet from the router on the same circuit breaker. So my 15 amp breaker, there's I think about 8 outlets or 7 outlets. I picked the one that was physically farthest from the router, and that's where I got my speed of the 306 down, 328 up. That is the speed that I use as a comparison to the office versus kitchen versus master bedroom when I was comparing it to the other 2 routers. So I wasn't doing anything to try to inflate the numbers of the Zyxel Powerline. I could have picked an outlet that would have beat wireless in the same room. However, at those speeds, you really aren't going to see a difference in real world use. So the whole point of this graph, though, is to show you again, on the same breaker, you can get speeds ranging from 500 megabits per second all the way down to the 150s just because I picked a better outlet. So it's important to test your room to see where you get the best performance. The last thing I want to point out is how interference can affect it. So I wanted to get the biggest possible impact on interference from an external source. Because the Zyxel Powerline kit has full power pass-through, I wanted to do speed tests with a compact fluorescent light system, basically one of our stage lighting, turned on and off to see how it would affect performance. And I got 482 down, 537 up as an average. But when I turned the compact fluorescent light on, I got 458 down, 533 up. The upload, again, I'm pretty much saturating the upload on my speed test for the internet. However, you can see the download speed did degrade by about 25 megabits per second. So there is a little bit of an impact that can be had depending on what kind of load you're putting on it. Fluorescent lighting is extremely noisy, so that's about the extreme. I think this proves that Zyxel does a really good job of isolating power on the outlet. So that'll help minimize any kind of performance impact in case you are plugging in other devices to it. So with that being said, that's a lot to cover. We kind of did a data dump, but it's useless to say, hey, it performs well if we don't show you the actual numbers and what we mean by that. That does prove, however, this is a great kit. These numbers would be exaggerated even further if you have something like a gazebo outside. I've recommended kits like this before for people that had a covered patio or some remote location that happens to be on the same circuit breaker panel. The Powerline kit won't degrade as bad as wireless. For anyone that steps out in a larger backyard or goes in the front driveway, you'll see the wireless performance absolutely plummet. However, depending on the location of your router, if you have an outlet that's not, GFI or, has a transformer built in like a USB port, you're still going to get great performance. And that's when the Powerline kit will absolutely destroy wireless. So I didn't focus so much on that because it's so unique for everyone's environment. However, even in an ideal setup like this home that we have configured here for testing, this still kept up with an extremely fast router, and it matched, exceeded, slightly lost to a mainstream router in a reasonable range without any external interference. So the performance is excellent. It doesn't bottleneck your Wi-Fi, which is great, so you can free that space up for tablets, phones, wireless laptops, etc. If you have a hardwired need, like a gaming console or something like that, this will perform admirably. And the ping time was excellent too. All of my speed tests, I didn't show ping times on those because they were all almost the same, basically within margin of error. Every single test got 9 to 12 megabits per second. The only time it exceeded that, when I hit over 500 megs per second on the speed test for the adjacent outlet in the same room, for some reason the ping times went up to like high 20s, low 30s a couple times, but it wasn't consistent, just for full disclosure. But aside from that, it was always 9 to 12 milliseconds, whether I was on wireless or not. So again, $105 right now on Amazon. It sells for about $100, long story short. I think it's an extremely capable kit. I love that it has the AC pass-through. I wish it had multiple Ethernet ports on the bottom, but you can connect these to a switch on both sides in case you need multiple devices to benefit from this. And I hope you found this review helpful, guys. If you have any questions, please shoot me a comment below. This is a little bit more technical than some normal reviews because it's important to understand how this stuff works and why. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what you saw, please subscribe. We have a lot of great content coming out, and I will see you next time.